welcome to this informal workshop that, as part of the Impulse South project, we have arranged for our partners participating in the negotiations, in the climate negotiations that are beginning next week in Bonn. Many of you might already be traveling to Bonn in the next days, might already be in Bonn, or might have Bonn in your agendas. You'll be hearing that word a lot. We have had within Impulse South a couple of discussions with our partners and have identified a need to have a quick workshop on negotiations, on what the sessions in Bonn will be looking at, how they work, and finally some tips for you to participate fully in those sessions. So that is what we are going to be discussing in the workshop today. We apologize because we know that for some, and I think in general, English is a language that can be difficult to handle by some. That is one of the biggest challenges in actually participating in the negotiating sessions and in the international climate regime. And we'll be going into that later on. The agenda of today is relatively simple. What we are going to do is we're going to begin with a small presentation of probably around 20 to 30 minutes on how the negotiations work, what is actually going to happen in Bonn, how that fits into the general climate regime and the COPs that we see every year. And then we'll finally go into a round of conversation amongst ourselves after that presentation. So everyone will get a chance to either pose questions or comments or reflections. And then finally, we will wrap up with a small poll that we have prepared for everyone, just to get some feedback on what you think about the workshop and of course, inputs for us on the work moving forward. So with that, if it's okay with everyone, I'm going to begin. Allow me to introduce myself because I believe I didn't do that at first. My name is Andrés Mogro. I work with Fundación Avina in the climate change program, and of course also in part of Impulse South, particularly of component 4, which relates to these international processes. I've been in Avina for a little over 2 years. And the reason why I'm going to be delivering this small talk on the negotiations is because I've been participating in the COPs and in the negotiating processes and all the subgroups and groups and funds and committees that you can think of for the last 10 years. So I have some experience as to what's happening in these spaces, and of course the challenges that we as delegates or participants from developing countries face in that space. So I'll begin with sharing with you a small slide that I've prepared for today. What you can see here in my screen is basically me trying to put together a lot of thoughts for you today. I think it's challenging at first to try and summarize everything in 30 minutes. I could speak to you about negotiations for hours, but I've prepared a small snapshot of what's going to happen in this session, and we will go through it together, if that's okay. So first, to begin, you will have heard that the session that we have next week starting in Bonn is called the Subsidiary Bodies. And informally, we call this the SBs 56. Now, why are these called the Subsidiary Bodies? Why the 56 is something that we'll go into now. So first, to begin with, what are the SBs, the Subsidiary Bodies? We call them SBs, right? So the SBs are something that was created at the same time that the COP itself and the convention itself was created back in 1992. So in 1992, we had the Rio summit in Brazil, which created 3 big conventions: the Climate Change Convention, the CBD, the Convention on Biodiversity, and the Convention on Desertification and Land Degradation. And with regards to each of those, what conventions are basically, they're a text, and they're a text through which countries commit themselves to certain commitments, principles, objectives, definitions, and so on. So this is something that the convention made. So if you look at the actual convention text from 1992, you will see that the convention is, as I was saying, a document that binds all the countries that have ratified it to a certain set of rules and commitments. Definitions, for instance, is something that the convention does in Article 1. The objective of the convention is something that it does in Article 2. And then you have principles in 3, commitments in 4, research in 5, education in 6. But this is basically what the convention says that countries should do. And if you take some time and look at each of these things, you'll have a clear idea of what countries are committed to doing under the convention. So the objective, for instance, just to go into this a little bit deeper, the objective of the convention is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations at a level that is not dangerous to the atmosphere, and within a time frame that allows for ecosystems to adapt to climate. That's the objective. And you have a set of principles which includes common but differentiated responsibilities, the precautionary principle, the fact that developed countries should take the lead, and so on. And then, of course, you have additional things on commitments, what the countries should do. If you want to take a closer look at commitments, for instance, you will see that everything that is under Article 4.1 are commitments that all countries have, which includes, for those of you that work in the government or that work in ministries of environment, you will see that everything that we as countries are doing in climate change comes from that article. It includes national communications, national greenhouse gas inventories, projects on mitigation and adaptation, land coast management, carbon sinks, and so on. So 4.1 includes everything that we do. And then there are specific commitments just for developed countries, which you will see in 4.3, 4.5, and 4.7, that are more related to the provision of financial and technology support to developing countries. But the crux of the matter is that we agreed to a convention in 1992. So then we sit down at the table in 92, we agree to a text that says what we should do, how, and how often we should do it, and so on. But the convention also has, it doesn't end in Article 6, it has like 15 more articles. And those 15 more articles relate to institutionality. So the convention also created institutionality. And that institutionality responded to relatively simple questions, like, for example, now that we've agreed to a convention and we are all parties to that convention, do we meet again? How often do we meet? What will the agenda be? What is our pending work? Do we have any, and if we do have any pending work, how do we go through that decision-making process? And finally, when we meet, what do we meet as? And all of these questions are answered by what comes later in the convention. If you look at Article 7, the convention created a COP. And a COP is a conference of all of those of us that are parties to the convention. So the COP is a conference of the parties. So every convention that you will see under the UN system has a COP. And this, for instance, the UNFCCC, the Climate Convention, created a COP for the UNFCCC, which means that the Kyoto Protocol, for instance, also has a COP. It also has a conference of parties of the Kyoto Protocol. That COP of the Kyoto Protocol is called the CMP. And the Paris Agreement also has a conference of parties, a COP of parties to the Paris Agreement, which is called the CMA. So when we have a COP at the end of each year, for instance, it's not just a meeting of one COP and one convention, it's usually 3 COPs that are just informally named as one. But you will see, for instance, COP26 was COP26, it was CMP 16, and it was CMA, I think it was CMA 3. So each convention, each instrument has a COP. So the COP of the UNFCCC, if you look at the text of Article 7, it says this is the body that adopts decisions to promote the effective implementation of the convention. It adopts methodologies, it can adopt formats, it can adopt procedures. So basically, this is the instrument that takes decisions. That is why when you will look at a decision coming from any COP, you will see, for instance, that the decision that adopted the Paris Agreement is decision 1/CP21. So this is the first decision that was taken in COP 21. And this is how decisions are numbered. So decisions are numbered by the number of the decision / then the body that took this decision, which can be the CP, the CMP, or the CMA, then a dot, and the number of the CMP, the number of the CMA, the number of the COP. That is how you will find decisions, and that is you will see the references that negotiators begin making of decisions. But what else did the convention create? It also created the Secretariat, which is now a big institution, a big building of experts that is set in Bonn. The Secretariat is meant to make arrangements and provide with services as required by the COP. So you can have decisions that require things of the Secretariat. So usually decisions require the Secretariat to make arrangements for a workshop. We can require the Secretariat to prepare a technical paper, to prepare a synthesis report, just to compile submissions and inputs from parties. Or usually what has happened through time is that we've requested the Secretariat to become more and more technical. So now the Secretariat has technical teams that provide support to countries on reports, on national inventories, on different types of technical procedures that we have to go through to implement the convention. And now the Secretariat has regional offices. So the Secretariat has become something big that supports the implementation of the agreements that we agreed to in '92. And then also the convention created subsidiary bodies, which is what you see. And this is what brings us to today's conversation. So these subsidiary bodies are the SABSTA, which is the subsidiary body for scientific and technical assessment. That's SABSTA. And this SABSTA is meant to do assessments on scientific knowledge, advice on scientific and technical programs. So the things that you see in the SABSTA agenda are usually things that still require a little bit of technical discussion. So the SABSTA agenda, we will go into that, are things that require a more detailed discussion. And then after the SABSTA, we also have the creation of the SBI. And you can see what the SBI does in Article 10. The SBI is the subsidiary body for implementation. And the SBI, what it does is it considers information communicated under Article 12. Article 12, the convention makes reference to national communications. So it considers the implementation, it considers how we are advancing in implementing our commitments. It assesses implementation. So those issues that are under the agenda of the SBI are the issues that are more related to following up on what countries are doing with regards to their commitments. And I'll give you an example, for instance. During many years, REDD+ discussions, I don't know if you've heard of REDD+. REDD+ is related to the reduction of emissions in forestry and carbon sinks. REDD+ was always under SABSTA because those were very technical discussions on methodologies and what we do and how we account for what we do and so on. But after the REDD+ framework was agreed in COP19 with the Warsaw framework for REDD+, REDD+ began to be discussed more in SBI, because now that we agreed on the technical issues, we go into following up on those methodological things that we've agreed. And apart from these more permanent subsidiary bodies, the COP, of course, has the possibility to create subsidiary bodies for specific things. So in the past, for instance, we had the ad hoc working group on the Kyoto Protocol, which was mandated to negotiate the following commitment periods of the Kyoto Protocol. We had the ad hoc working group on long-term comparative action, which finalized in COP 18 and was meant to look forward at long term. Didn't really have a lot to show for that. We had an ADP, which was the subsidiary body that was tasked with negotiating a new agreement, which then became the Paris Agreement. And we had an APA, which was a subsidiary body tasked with negotiating the rules of the Paris Agreement, which was dissolved in COP24 when we finalized those rules. And now we only have the SABSTA and the SBI as subsidiary bodies. Now, something that is important to mention is that the SBs, the subsidiary bodies, also serve any COP that is created under the UNFCCC. And why am I mentioning this? Because the SBs also have in their agendas issues that relate to the Paris Agreement, issues that relate to the Kyoto Protocol, even though the SABSTA and the SBI were created under the COP. This is more of a technical discussion, but I just wanted to mention that the SABSTA and the SBI are also groups that that negotiate issues related to the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol. Now, before I go into the second thing of how the sessions work, I want to show you how we consult on the agendas of the sessions. How do we find the agendas of the sessions? So this is relatively easy, and I think those of you that want to participate in technical discussions during the SBs will need to know. So you go into the UNFCCC webpage right now, which is unfccc.int, and you see that the first thing that you find there are welcome to the Bonn Climate Change Conference, so on. And you see here that there is a link for SABSTA 56 and SBI 56. And if you enter either of those, I'm going to go into SABSTA, for instance, you will see that there's a session on agenda documents and opening session and so on. So you will see, for instance, here in organizational matters, adoption of the agenda, and you see the documents related to the agenda. If you go into this one, which is called an annotated agenda, not a simple agenda, you have this available in all the 6 languages of the UN. So we'll go into English, for instance, and you have the agenda. This is the agenda for the SABSTA, for SABSTA 56. And you see each of the issues that will be negotiated or discussed as part of the next session. And the good thing with an annotated agenda is that it doesn't end at the agenda, but it goes into each of these relatively, a little bit superficially, I would say. But you see, for instance, that the Nairobi work program, you have a little bit of background on the Nairobi work program. I have also a little bit of what's happened in the next session, in the previous sessions. And here in action, you see what will happen now in this session. Now, the good thing about this is that you have a lot of references to past decisions, as you can see here below. So you can look up those past decisions and get up to date as to what will happen, for instance, with the discussions in the Nairobi work program. So if you wanted to follow this Nairobi work program, you could do it just by looking at the annotated agenda. So what you have to do to prepare for that participation is to look at these issues, look at this document on the SABSTA agenda, find the things that you're interested in following, or your delegation, your country is interested in following. Then you read what's below on background and information, you get up to date, and you come up with your own opinion as to what you would want this session to do. And that would be your position, for instance. And on the basis of that position, you would begin engaging and trying to shape the outcome of discussions to reflect your interests. So how do these sessions work? Now that we've looked at the agendas very quickly, how do the sessions work? Each subsidiary body has an agenda, as I showed you, and a chair. And it will begin with a plenary. Each of those items that you saw in the agenda, each agenda item has co-chairs and a result. So this result ultimately will end in a COP decision, and that decision will be enforceable. It will create something, will advance things in one direction or another. So how negotiations work in practice, it will begin first with an opening plenary. This picture that you see here of a giant room with 3,000 people and press behind and all the delegations and everyone, this is a plenary. And the plenary is the most formal of all the spaces of negotiations. This is where the decisions are adopted, but this is not where decisions are negotiated. Decisions are adopted once at a negotiating level. The group that has been tasked with discussing that issue has finalized and has forwarded their input to the plenary, and then the plenary puts that to consideration of everyone and then adopts it with a gavel. So the first opening plenary, what it will do, it will appoint officials. So the SBI chair or the SBI or the SAPSTA chair will say, we'll open negotiations. This is what will happen on June 6th, for instance. You will have an opening plenary. So we're going to open these discussions. We have appointed these two people to be co-chairs of that agenda item. Usually, well, always the co-chairs are one from a developed country, one from a developing country. And then we are announcing that the first meeting of that agenda item will take place this afternoon at 3 in room Bonn 7, in room Nairobi, in room, I don't remember the names of the rooms that you will be in anymore. But that's what's going to happen. So you'll have an opening of the negotiations and adoption of the agenda and appointment of officials. And that's all that happens in opening plenaries. And then you will go to this type of meeting. So you see this type of meeting has less people. Around this table, you will only have the people following that agenda item, so less people than in the plenary. And this is a contact group. So the contact group is the formal stage of negotiations. It will have the co-chairs that the SBI or the SAPSTA chair has appointed. They will be in front of you and they will say, well, thank you very much. Just to remind you, this is the background of discussions under this agenda item. We are meant in this session to do this and that. And now we open the floor for opening remarks. And those opening remarks usually come from negotiating groups, not from individual parties. But I will go into that later on. After opening contact groups, you will have informal meetings, which of course have nothing informal about them, but informal meetings look exactly the same as the contact group, exactly the same people, exactly the same co-chairs, but this is the space where we start discussing text, like negotiation text, inputs from parties, what we want the outcome to look like. And once we are done with the outcome, we will come back to a contact group, which is the formal stage of negotiations. The contact group will say, of course, we've had 5 informal meetings, 2 informal meetings, 4 informal meetings. That depends on how much time you need and how much time the presidency allocates to this. And the co-chairs of the contact group will say, we're done with discussions. We are forwarding this to the plenary. They will forward it to the plenary, and then the closing plenary will adopt this. This will happen at the end of the 2 weeks. So that's more or less how negotiations work. Now, what will the agenda look like for those of you that will be participating during those 2 weeks? This is what the agenda looks like. So officially, preparatory meetings are beginning today. We have preparatory meetings until the 5th, until this weekend, sorry. And then you have the first day of negotiations on Monday, 6th. The middle part of the negotiations is Sunday, June 12th. And then the end, the closing plenary is meant for the 16th. So let's go into the preparatory meetings. Okay, I see that there are questions arriving. That's good. We'll go into the questions when we're done. So what are the preparatory meetings? The preparatory meetings are the space where negotiating groups meet outside of negotiations and they prepare themselves. They discuss all of the agenda items. They ask themselves, what are we prioritizing? What should be our position on the issues that we have prioritized? And who will lead us on this? Because negotiating groups negotiate as a whole. So they need to have one person to be the spokesperson or the lead negotiator to negotiate on behalf of the group. And of course, the rest of the group can come in the negotiations. They can support their coordinator, but they would never, for instance, contradict the coordinator. If they want to contradict, they would take that outside, or they would wait for that session to be over, come back to a coordination, because these groups also have daily coordinations. And they say, I didn't agree with what you said. We need to focus this way or another. But it's important to note that when you have a coordinator, you would never contradict them on the floor in front of everyone, because you show where those cracks are, and then it's easy to go at those cracks. So today and tomorrow, we have preparatory meetings for the LDCs, which are the least developed countries. On the second and the third, there are preparatory meetings for the African group of negotiators, the small island developing states, the like-minded developing countries. Then on the fourth and the fifth, we have preparatory meetings for the G77 in China, which are all developing countries. So this is our largest and strongest group, all developing countries. And of course, it makes sense that the subgroups would meet beforehand so that then they can provide inputs to the larger group. So I will briefly go into what are the groups, the negotiating groups that you will see in the sessions. So basically, to be overly simple, there are two negotiating groups, developed countries and developing countries. And I have classified them in these two categories because their positions are very much aligned. Within developing countries, they're very much aligned with each other. And with developed countries, they're also very much aligned with each other. So in developed countries, you have the umbrella group of countries, which are the UG. These are basically the United States and their friends. So it's United States, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Russia, Canada. That's the umbrella group of countries. Then you have the EIG, which is the environmental integrity group. And this is comprised of Korea, Monaco, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, and Mexico. And then you have, of course, the EU, the European Union. In total, developed countries are around 45 countries. Now, developing countries are around 145 countries, but they have a larger difficulty coordinating with each other. So in the group of developing countries, you have, as I told you, the largest of all, which is the G77 in China. This is the group that represents all developing countries. So it is in your advantage and in developing countries' advantage that the G77 in China has a common position on something. So the G77 in China will have coordinators on adaptation, on mitigation, on markets, on finance, and so on. And it's, of course, something that we should try to do to have the group have a single position. Then you have the LMDC, which are the like-minded developing countries. These include countries from Africa, countries from small island states, from LDCs, from the Arab League. So it's a very mixed group. You have the African group of countries, AOSIS, which is the alliance of small island states, the LDCs, the Arab League, ILAC, which is the alliance of independent states from Latin America and the Caribbean, and ABU, which is Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay. So those are the groups within developing countries. So what's going to happen in the sessions once you finalize the group coordinations, if you're going as a country delegate, you will go to group coordinations. We'll have on the 6th opening plenaries, which I've told you will take probably the morning. And then in the afternoon, you'll begin with negotiating sessions. Between the 7th and the 16th, you will have negotiating sessions and events. Now, it's impossible to know what will happen each day now, because the agendas are confirmed the night before the next day begins. And this, of course, happens because the agendas are always very packed and they need to adapt to what issues require more time, what issues are ending first, and how you can allocate time to those that need it most. So this is, of course, the result of consultations with the presidencies and the chairs and the co-chairs, how much time you need. Are you closing? Are you beginning to end, and so on. On the 16th, you will have closing plenaries. On the 12th, which is the mid Sunday, you will have no agenda. So this is a free day, which usually is an opportunity that groups take to coordinate. So it's important to know that during these 20 days, you will not have a free day. And something important that I also wanted to mention, because in Impulse South, we're making a big focus on the global stocktake process. The global stocktake process will begin on the 9th and will go until the 14th, the global stocktake. So the global stocktake is comprised of technical dialogues, roundtables, and a world cafe. And it has its own agenda. What you are seeing here right now is the agenda of the global stocktake. So the global stocktake will begin with roundtables on Friday. It will have it has a technical dialogue opening on the afternoon of Thursday. Then it goes into roundtables on Friday. This is too dark. It's technical opening, roundtables. Then it has a World Cafe on Friday afternoon, roundtables again on Saturday afternoon, roundtables again on Monday afternoon, and a technical dialogue closing on Tuesday. It has its own agenda, and it will take 5 days to finalize that agenda. And it has to have some sort of outcome and output that can be forwarded to the COP and the next regional dialogue that needs to take place between the SBs and the COP. And just to begin finalizing, I want to go into questions that I'm sorry I've taken too much time. Just a couple of tips for participating. First, a tip on taking the floor. You will have, those of you that will go as a delegate, you will have a nameplate with your country at the outside, or just as you walk in every room in a table. That is called your flag. So your flag, of course, you have to take the flag of your country with the name of your country, and you sit down. And then when you want to take the floor, when you want to speak, you need to stand that flag upwards. And once it's up, people will see you, they will write down your name, they will begin allowing people to speak in the order that they have asked to speak. So a couple of tips for those of you that will take the floor, and please do take the floor in the global stocktake process, in the technical dialogues, in the roundtables, everywhere, take the floor. And it doesn't matter if you make a mistake. I have made a lot of mistakes in my years. I once took the floor and spoke for like 10 minutes, and then the co-chair said, "You are in the wrong agenda item. You're in the wrong room." And everyone laughed, but it's okay. I mean, do that, because that's the only thing that will help you loosen up and lose that fear to speak. So tips on taking the floor. First, ask for the floor. You can't just speak without asking for the floor. But before you ask for the floor, you need to ask yourself whether your group has spoken. So those of you, of course, those of us that are developing countries, the G77 needs to speak first, because that's the largest group. And after the G77 speaks, our group coordinators, so say I'm from Africa, the coordinator from the African group of countries needs to speak first. We'll have a lead negotiator, he will or she will speak first. And after that happens, I can ask for the floor. And it's good that they speak first, because you can make notes of what they're saying. You can take the floor and support them, and then add on your own things. If you are one of those group coordinators, then you can speak first. So you begin by thanking the co-chair. So thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. and Mrs. Co-chair. If you're taking the floor for a second time, you need to apologize. So I'm sorry for taking the floor again. Be brief, because a lot of people want to take the floor, and sometimes you want to respond to something that someone has said. You request for the floor, and they give you the floor an hour afterwards. So that response is no longer appropriate. So people need to be brief as they can. You can come back we can take the floor again. So in order to be brief, it's always useful to have notes. So write down what you want to say, because that will help you be brief and be clear. When you begin speaking, you need to associate your support. So say, first, I want to associate myself or my delegation with the statement made by the G77 in China coordinator, so support them, or by the AOSIS coordinator, by the AGN coordinator, by the LDC's coordinator, by the LMDC coordinator. So you need to find out what group you're part of course. Be clear, enunciate, and speak slowly. This is because people need to be taking note of what you're saying. If you want people to take note, the secretary to take note, the chairs to take note and reflect what you are saying, then you can't be speaking very fast because they won't be able to take note of what you're saying. So you'll be doing yourself a disservice. If you're a first timer, introduce yourself. I mean, try to be comfortable with yourself. So good morning, everyone. Good to see some known faces. Those of you I haven't met, my name is Andrés. So good to be here. So try to loosen. If you are comfortable, try to break the ice by making a joke, for instance. I've said I'm not a very good lawyer, and that's because I'm not a lawyer. So if you have people laughing, that's always good. Speak in plural. You are not presenting your opinion. You're presenting a we opinion. So we don't feel, my delegation doesn't feel, my group doesn't feel. It's not just I don't like, because that just makes you feel unflexible. Be flexible, be open to dialogue, provide in writing. You need to provide your inputs in writing if you are too long, because that will help the co-chairs reflect what you're saying. Be formal and neutral. Try to find the difference between formal and informal language. I've heard people, for instance, say money instead of financial resources. In the finance negotiations, we're not negotiating money. We're negotiating financial resources, financial support. It's different. Do not contradict your allies. I mean, it's always good to strengthen your links with your allies. Don't contradict them. If you can't support them. So I want to support what the other group has said, with what X person has said, because the result of negotiations is all of you supporting and creating something. So you can't create something if you're contradicting. And finally, thank. So thank you for giving me the floor. So those are very general steps for taking the floor. So now with some tips, now begin to close. Be prepared. Just revise the issues that you want to follow. Don't put your delegation as a disadvantage. Active listening, listen to the propositions. If you can, you can always ask for clarifications. If you need time to consult with your partners, ask for that time to consult. They will give it to you. Identify red lines, things that you cannot cross within what you want. Demonstrate flexibility. Ask your counterparts to react to your proposals. Don't reject their proposals straight away. Identify interests and try to address them, not just people, because sometimes people can be annoying, but their interests can be good. Try to build personal relationships. Don't go as a note taker. You're not going to a session to take notes. You're going to participate, so don't be scared to participate. Support and seek support in allies. And I will close with this. Challenges for us in developing countries to participate in these spaces. First, of course, foreign language. If you're not from an English-speaking country, it's very difficult to break that ice within yourselves the first time. There are pre-existing relationships. You will see people saying hi to each other, having lunch, and if you're a new person, it's like being the new kid in school. It's difficult. So this creates an intimidating setting. There's a lot of technical knowledge that you need to take with you to the negotiation. You need to have a calling and an interest to participate and not just be bored and leave, because people get bored and leave. And you can do that and nobody will know, but you need to, of course, be interested in the things. And finally, there are governmental arrangements that are usually difficult to go through. For instance, if you want to participate as a party, you can only be a public servant and so on. So that's difficult, of course, to have the right people always at that space. And there's high rotation in the public service. And of course, that's a big challenge in itself. And I will leave it at that. I'm sorry that I've taken long. I hope that you haven't been bored. If anybody has any questions or reactions or comments, I'm very happy to discuss with all of you. Thank you. So the floor is open for those of you who want to speak. I've stopped sharing so we can see each other. This is just a very informal space, you know. I hope you've enjoyed. I remember a question being in the chat. So you have questions, you can send them to the chat too. We had a question from Alice that said, what are the criteria for nominating members of the contact group? If you want to participate in a contact group, you can just go. I mean, contact groups are open. You will have different colored badges in the conference. That is, of course, a thing. If you are part of a country, a governmental delegation, your badge will be pink. If you are an observer, your badge will be yellow. If you are press, green. If you are NGO, you have orange badges if you're head of delegation. So pink and orange, if you are a party delegate, you can go into any group. And if you're interested in that agenda item, just look at the schedule, what will happen, when will it be, and just go in. And there are no criteria for entering a contact group. There are criteria for nominating co-chairs of a contact group, and that can also be part of the question from Alice. The co-chairs are usually experienced negotiators that have been in a process for a long time. So the presidency knows them, the secretary knows them, and then they can suggest those and then invite them. They don't do elections or something like that. Aurelius, thank you. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much for the elaborate presentation. I actually enjoyed your presentation. I remember I also attended the one that you did for the COP26 when we were just preparing for the COP26. A very interesting flow of information. Now, my interest in today's presentation was to see the link between the SB sessions and the COP negotiations, because they're both negotiations, right? But then from the flow of your presentation, it seems the negotiations that take place in Bonn are somewhat similar or almost the same as the negotiations taking place in at the COP itself. So the question is, what is the main role for the SB sessions, you know, as compared to the COP that will be happening in Egypt? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, Aurelius. It's a very good question. I forgot to go into this because I realized that I didn't have enough time. Every year we have a COP at the end of each year. So you have, for instance, COP26 and then COP27. And usually at the mid part, you have an SB session. In the COP26, for instance, you had a lot of bodies meeting. You had COP26, you have CMP 16, you had CMA 3, we had SBI 55 and SAPSTA 55. All of those things happen in COP26. One is just COP26. So each of these has an agenda. And usually the COPs, all the three COPs, they give technical mandates to the subsidiary bodies. So they ask them, continue discussing this and then provide with recommendations at the next COP, and then we will take a decision. So the SBs take this, they have an agenda that has been given to them by the COP. They advance on technical discussions, and the outcomes of this is not a decision like the COP takes decision. The outcomes of these are a conclusion. So the conclusions are forwarded to the COP, and that is the main input that you take for a decision that the COP will take. So that's why it's really part of the process. And the negotiations and the ESBs are very similar to the COP, but the agenda is less heavy because there are less things to do. You just focus on more technical discussions, and you come up with conclusions and you forward those conclusions to the COP. That's why you have COP26 and COP27, because COP only happens one time every year, but the SBs happen 2 times every year. They happen during a COP and they happen during a subsidiary session. That's why we have SB 56 now and COP27, because the SBs happen 2 times every year. I don't know if that answers your question, but that is definitely something that I was forgetting to tell you all.
Well, it does, though it has now generated, you're saying that at COP26, we had another SB session, which was SB 55, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the one that happened in 2021 in June, the one that happened in June, the online one, was SB 54, right?
Yes, that is exactly it.
Okay, thanks.
I have another question from Sule. He says, is there a slot position for a country? How do they say they share the number of participants by country? So the number of participants by country isn't really, it's not closed. It depends on financing, because sending people to Bonn and paying for their hotels and their meals is expensive. But the convention, for instance, provides financial support to developing countries to participate. The convention will have communicated this to the focal point, the national focal point, and probably provided financing for two slots for people to go. If you want to send more people, you can. I mean, the delegations can have 20 people, 30 people, 40. I've seen delegations of over 100 people going. That is, of course, the financing of the country or cooperation or whatever. Yes, Sule, I have you with your hand up. We can see you, but we can't hear you, Sule.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm saying good morning to everyone, or good afternoon, according to your location. And thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Yes, I have to make a comment among the challenges. I have seen the challenges you have listed. So this is my personal observation, mostly for the African delegates. When they went there, you see them, instead of staying in the room discussions, some of them they are out, some they are shopping, some they are doing a lot of things. There is really a problem. That way, in terms of capacity building, you're having a problems. You can see somebody who attended many COPs, but when you look at those guys, is just the only one having the knowledge. And some they don't even understand the issue, really the issue, what is all about. They're just traveling for traveling. I think there is a problem in some mostly West African countries. I have been in Bonn, I have seen some of them just during the discussion, they're shopping. I'm asking myself if those guys they are really representing us. I don't know if you are getting me what this is really a problem, because you need people to understand the issue and come back to build our capacity so that you can understand easily. Sometimes there's in some ministries you don't even understand who understands really the issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that comment, Sule. I agree with you. I've seen this happen, and it's a sad situation, honestly, because once you are there representing your country, there is no one else who is controlling where you go, what sessions you attend to. Usually that's a role of a head of delegation. But if the head of delegation is that person doing this, then there's really little that other countries can do. I mean, that's really, I would say, a bad arrangement from the government of not really showing that interest and having that control in the delegates that they are sending. That, of course, happens a lot. You are correct in this. Aurelius.
Thank you very much, and sorry for getting back. I've understood how the SBs feed into the COP itself. Now I want to also understand how do the negotiations, the technical negotiations, feed into politics, because I know that the negotiations might be technical somewhat. Of course, there are those high-level delegation meetings that take place in the first place and everything. But then at the end of it all, when we get back to our countries, we are expected to feed in information to our decision makers, policy makers, and the like. So within the negotiations framework, at which points do political negotiations also come in? I know there are certain sessions, but then how do they just, how do us, the technical people, help feed our policymakers within this negotiation framework?
Okay, your question is You're making really good questions today. It is. Your question, I think, relates to what the role of a negotiator is after the negotiation happens. And I've always thought that, for instance, there's a big difference between international policy. So what happens at the COPs and the decisions and so on, and then what happens in a country, like national policy. And sometimes it's difficult to translate the decisions and say, what does this mean for us? I mean, what do we have to do once the decision is made? And it's also difficult to say, this is what's happening in my country that needs to reflect in international decisions. And I think this is the role of the people that go to the sessions. I mean, make sure that what's happening in your country and the circumstances and the needs and the national policies of your country are reflected somehow in the decisions. So, for instance, let me give you an example. In Ecuador, which is where I've worked for many years, it's illegal to have carbon markets in forests. It's illegal. I mean, the constitution doesn't allow it. So if that were a requirement from the international level to account for carbon markets in forests, then you would need to, as an Ecuadorian delegate, said this is not possible for me. So I'm sorry if you're requiring this. I'm informing you beforehand. We will not present this information because it's not possible for me. And you would need also to do the same thing. Once the COP is finished, people who have gone to the COP or people in the countries that know about COPs, you don't need to have gone to the COP. You need to open the webpage after the COP is finished, and you need to look at the decisions. The decisions will be binding. I mean, the decisions will say countries will need to present their first report in 2024. And if nobody in the country reads that, if you don't begin preparing that report, in 2024, you will be failing a commitment. So you need to also look at what decisions are being taken and then go back to your country and say, we have new commitments, new obligations. We need to begin fulfilling those obligations. And normally, if it's an obligation that comes from a COP, you can ask for financing for that, I mean, from international sources, because it's a commitment. So, for instance, negotiations took a very long time until we agreed on NDCs. A very long time. I mean, we began discussing NDCs in 2013, and now we have reporting guidelines for NDCs. These were adopted in 2021, last year. And that took a long time. It took a long time. So this is what, 7-8 years that it took to discuss NDCs, and we would do what we would do with NDCs. And those discussions at first are technical. What do we need to do? How do we reflect this? What methodologies to use? How do we account for things? And then they become political. So how often do we present NDCs? Who will finance my NDC? I mean, now that we know what an NDC is, let's discuss what happens with this. Then it turns political. And the political stage has, as you said, high-level events. Now every COP has a president session. That's ridiculous for me. I mean, that is only happening since COP21, but now every COP has a president's super high-level session, and then we have high levels with ministers. We have declarations and political statements and so on. And to be honest with you, I mean, as a practitioner, political statements and declarations don't mean anything. I mean, it's fine, they will appear on the news, but the important thing are decisions, COP decisions, because COP decisions will bind governments to do specific things, like the biennial transparency reports, for instance, that we now have to do until until 2024, like the greenhouse gas inventories, like the methodologies for accounting NDCs and so on. Those things were technical at first, but now they are commitments that countries have to comply with at the national level. Anybody else would like to take the floor? I know we're very close to our time. I hope that those of you who haven't taken the floor have enjoyed the conversation. I really do, because we would like to have more conversations like this with you. We want to organize something before COP27, something after COP27, then continue these discussions with you. If we get a chance to be there at the COP, for instance, we would like to also meet with you during the COP, see how you are doing, support what you are following, because the idea is to create a group that can support each other in the future. Oreto, do we have our poll ready?
Yes, we have it. So I'm gonna share it with you on the chat.
Okay, everyone. So we have a small poll that we have prepared for you after the session. This is, of course, just something feedback for us, so that you can tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, what we can change, so we can provide something that is interesting for you. So please go into the link that Oreto has shared in the chat. And if you can fill that form, we would be very thankful with you. Aurelius, I see you asking for the floor. Please go ahead.
I'm sorry, Andres. I was hoping someone else raises their hand when you asked, so that I don't have to come back. Unfortunately, I attended COP26 for the first time, and I did follow your training last time. I experienced something there in terms of the draft text. Immediately after everything is done, and it continued to show draft even on the website without a number, without a number. So even when I was trying to do the report, I found it a bit difficult to access. Remember the numbers that you were talking about, decision 1,
yes.
CP26 or CP, yeah. So I found it a bit difficult to reference those decisions to specific numbers. Yeah, so I just want to understand at which point do the decisions, cease to be drafts, and at which point do they, now give them those numbers? Sorry for that.
No, please come back as many times as you want, because your questions are very good, Aurelius, and I'm happy that you're interested. Decisions officially become decisions at the COP closing plenary. Once they are adopted, there's a gavel, they officially become decisions. But the point at which they are giving their number and published on the web page can take a long time, to be honest, because I've also been in charge of making those reports after a COP. It can take months, and it can take 3 months or 4 months for the web page to give numbers to decisions. That can be very frustrating. And before they are giving numbers, you can only make reference to them as the title of the decision, because the title would say long-term finance, a new collective goal, green climate fund, something. It will only have a title, but the number itself will only come months afterwards, sometimes 3 or 4 months after. We have a question from Rolex. He says, if you're not government, how do you get to participate in COP negotiations as an individual, NGO, private company observer? Okay, Rolex, if you are not a government, you need to have an institution accredit you to enter the conference. This institution needs to be an accredited institution, an accredited observer. You can find accredited observers in the page of the convention, and you will see a giant list of institutions that can go to the convention, to the negotiations. One of those institutions will accredit you. If you work in one of those, if you have relations with one of those, you can ask them to accredit you. And once they accredit you, they will issue a badge when you go to the sessions, and depending on the color of that badge, that you can enter different sessions. Now, the good thing about negotiations, it's not only about negotiations when you go. I mean, there's a very big parallel agenda during the session. So there's a lot of events and panels and exhibitions and stands, and that's how the private sector and NGOs also participate in the COPs. I mean, we create those spaces for governments to see us, or for us to see them, or for us to see each other and create those links. So the COPs and the subsidiary bodies are also a very big space for lobbying. I mean, for creating those contacts with people, and that's usually why NGOs, private companies, observers attend. Of course, the observers, particularly the press, have a close watch on what's happening in the negotiation, not just these parallel agenda, and that's usually why you go. But that's how you get to participate, by being accredited by an accredited organization. So I think we're a little past our time. Just a quick reminder to all of you to please go into the form that Oreto has sent in the chat, so we can get some feedback from you and organize further events. It's difficult to accommodate your needs and your interests if we don't have inputs from that form. So just that as a quick last reminder. And with that, I think we can thank all of you. Yes, Oreto, you want to do a quick closing?
No, I wanted to insist on the poll, yes, because it will help us a lot. If you have enjoyed it, please, it will just take you a couple of minutes, even less. Thank you very much for attending today, and thank you very much, Andrés, for this very interesting presentation, and for all of you that have participated and have joined us today. It's a pleasure to be with you, and hope that through the poll, we can get a sense of what you need or what you feel that could be useful for future workshops, and we can see each other soon.
Thank you, Oreto. We'll probably also send you the poll to those of you that have attended via email, just as a quick reminder. But thank you all for registering and for being with us today.
Please share the recording as well. It would be great to have the recording just to bounce back on the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Aurelius.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day and afternoon.